Hello everyone, this is Lily Mott. For each chapter, I'm going to go over the PowerPoint so you guys can have access to that information at any time instead of having to wait for a particular moment for us all to meet. So this class will be held completely online. And so welcome to Sociology of Human Behavior, Mental Disorders, and Other Illnesses. For each chapter, you're going to have learning objectives, so you can just look over them. Feel free to pause the audio or the video, depending on where you're viewing this, in order for you to look over these. Just remember these learning objectives are optional, but it's always great practice to skim through them or even try to understand something that really piques your interest. For this class, it's important that you understand the foundation of knowledge when it comes to social work. It is important to realize that social work deals with people and their interactions with the environment, interactions with other people, interactions that they have at work. You're going to try to understand people and their problems, analyzing those problems, and how to help them with those problems. And also making sure that you understand that people don't just work by themselves. They have to exist within systems. So it could be a system of how a family is run. You call that a familial system. It can be an organizational system, and that deals with their job and their role at their job and how they communicate or what work they have to do. And it's also important to know that people live within a governmental system. So things like policies, legislation, even social norms, which isn't a law, but is what most people deem as normal in a particular society, those things are all systems that people work within. And it's important for social workers to know what is important, how are things supposed to be, you can say, as far as the norm goes, and then if there's any deviations from the norm, such as child abuse, which is mentioned in this chapter, later on in this chapter, but knowing what a normal family dynamic should look like and what an abusive environment could potentially look like. And they would have to take into account the biological processes that are normal for a child developing, the psychological processes and the physiological processes, and to see if there's any deviation from those. And once the person, the social worker or sociologist, knows what those issues are, they have to have the knowledge and wherewithal to critically think of the information, that the resources that they can use, and how they can help solve the issue either for the family or just for the individual. But social work basically is a very broad term. It just deals with anything and everything, dealing with personal problems, social problems, worldly problems, but it affects everyone. It's interdependent, so there's interlocking systems. It's not just looking solely at this person maybe having bad behavior. It's looking at what is causing this. So looking at the example of the child dealing with child abuse, you will also look at the parent and how is the parent doing this type of abuse? Is it verbal? Is it emotional? Is it financial? Is it physical? And what is causing this? Is the parent on drugs? Is the parent dealing with a lot of stress and taking it out on the child? Does the parent lack resources? So all of those do play a part, even though it's not excusing the parent's behavior, because we don't do that. But we do look at many things that could be working against the child in the situation. Like I said, all these systems are interdependent. And I already mentioned the importance of assessment, but it is very important that the information is gathered, analyzed, and interpreted. So we have to look at why people do the things they do and how those resources can be identified and how they can be translated in a way that the person can understand them. And when I say translated, it's not just the language, but it's thinking about that a lot of people interpret information, at least in the U.S., on a 6th grade reading level, and in some cases, if it has graphics, things like that, or pictures, charts, it should be on a 4th grade reading level just to make sure everybody can understand. And that's within the entirety of the U.S., which does include ESL or people that didn't finish high school or middle school, up to people that, have specialized with a PhD or an MD or whatever career field they have going into. So it's encompassing everyone. And I mentioned identifying alternative resources or alternative supports for the child or the abused child, for the example I was talking about, or for anyone in this situation, and making sure that there's alternative courses of action. So just thinking, do we remove the child immediately? Okay, so if we decide to remove the child, is there a safe place for the child to go that's with a trusted family member, or is it a safe place for the child to go that's within the community? And then just making sure that the child is protected. So just thinking about, okay, so if they're with a certain family member, will that family member give that the parent access to the child again where the child is unprotected, or will that other family member make sure they're in the room at all times, and make sure that a social worker is there just to ensure that the child is safe, and no matter what the parent is going through, that it's not going to come out negatively on the child. So you have to think about the different consequences of any situation that you're trying to intervene and help with. It is important to have an understanding of human development and the normal processes that people go through, and also the challenges that people may face during certain times in their development. So the book is going to talk about infancy and childhood, adolescence, young and middle adulthood, and later adulthood. So each portion, because there's four divisions of the group, four sections. So it's going to break them down into those age groups that I talked about. So we have to think about biological development, and that deals with the physical aspects of somebody physically developing. We deal with the psychological development, and that deals with cognitive functioning, thought processes, and we deal with social development, and that's how people interact with others around them or with their environment. So putting those all together, bio, psycho, social development, we're basically seeing how a person internally and externally deals with others. And we're going to look at some common life events such as marriage. We will look at developmental milestones for children and babies, and then also later in older adulthood as the body starts to break down over time. And so we'll make sure we just deal with each category and the individual as a distinct entity. So we might look at just an individual when we deal with certain cases, and then we also might look at groups and when we deal with certain cases. It just depends on what the situation is. To understand how individuals think and act and interpret and interact with others and their environments and their circumstances, we have to understand human behavior. So we have to deal with cultural competency, oppression, and populations at risk. So when we deal with cultural competency, it's just making sure that we have a basic understanding and respect for people of cultures that might not be our culture. So when we discuss culture, it's not just race or phenotypical differences of what someone looks like. It could be having the southern culture for people who live in the southern states. It could be having a beach or coastal culture. It could be riding horses. It could be people having farms. It could be those that are in the music industry. So there are various cultures that we are part of. It could deal with your heritage and what country or languages, foods, music, any of that people are involved in, but also realizing that there are other people, when it comes to religion and how that might affect their healthcare or their choices in life. And just having respect for it and seeking understanding, because in order to help somebody, you have to sort of have some at least basic level understanding of them, their situation, and respect goes a long way. Also dealing with oppression. So there are various groups that deal with oppression. For chapter 1 discussion, I do want you to either research, or if you already know of any groups that deal with oppression, and just sort of discuss that just to get us going in this class. You can Google it or whatever platform you use to look anything up. And then there's also discrimination. So In the book, it talks about the diversity people have in anything that makes them different than whatever is mainstream or whatever the majority is. So, according to the textbook, it includes age, class, color, culture, disability and ability, ethnicity, gender identity and expression, immigration status, marital status, political ideology, race, religion slash spirituality, sex, sexual orientation, and tribal sovereign status. And so people, depending on where they fall into these groups, it might be an overlap or it might not, but they will have to deal with the effects of that diversity or those differences. It could be by the way people treat them or the way they're viewed. It could be the way they view themselves within the larger system. But all of that does need to be taken into account in order to properly help somebody so you have more of an understanding of who they are. In any population at risk is any group of people who share identifiable characteristics. So it's something that you can visibly see that might put them at greater risk of social and economical deprivation. So anything that you can see about somebody that makes them different from the mainstream or the majority in a certain situation. Those are the things that make somebody more at risk in certain situations. And then we move on to power, privilege, and acclaim. It's important to realize that power is the ability to achieve one's goals despite the opposition of others. So if someone has power, they usually are the type of person that can walk into a room and people take notice, or when they speak, people listen. However, there are also people that have quiet power, and there's different types of power. You know, it could be somebody who's like really strong and aggressive and abrasive, and they could pressure somebody or coerce them into doing something. It could be someone's boss that's wielding power over them. It could be maybe that they have power within their social capital, and that's just because either of who they are or if they represent the dominant mainstream group. Or the larger group of people. So that could be something that's ascribed to them, even if, you know, they're just born into the situation, and that's just, it is what it is. There are people that do have privilege and power without doing anything to earn that or work for that, just because of how society is ran. So when it comes to discussing power, privilege, and acclaim, just make sure you realize that within a system, people are placed in a hierarchy, and the people that are placed in the hierarchy usually aren't the ones in control of that hierarchy, but they are able to benefit from it just by the fact that they exist. So when it comes to privilege, people might get special rights. It could be because they have money, so people think of prestige when they think of privilege. But in other circumstances, somebody might hear that they have privilege, and it might be confusing or jarring because, you know, they're not wealthy or they don't have those connections to just travel everywhere, buy everything they need for their family and their children, friends, whatever that may be. But when it comes to privilege, it's like the amount of social respect that is given to them, or the fact that they don't have to deal with certain situations at all, to the point where they might not even realize those situations exist because they've never experienced them, and the people that they know haven't experienced them, or the people that they know have not, for whatever reason, felt the need to speak to them about whatever the issue may be that they're experiencing. So for some people, when they say like, oh, this doesn't exist, or, you know, like I've never heard of that situation happening, that really might be what it is for them in their world. Because people, at least when they get older, they become homogenous and go with groups that, people that reflect the groups that they are, or like have the values and morals that they believe in. Or they were just born into an area and don't move away from that area. So there's a lot of that. But there's various reasons why somebody might have like a smaller worldview, that's just because maybe they're not world traveled or haven't met different types of people. And that's usually where college comes in. People go to college and you meet various types of people, or you move to a different state or a different region, or even, overseas. And then it broadens people's perspective. And that's when people say they're more open minded or globally um, open. And that's just because they've met different people, they've lived in different situations. So things aren't as minute or aren't just the American way. Since, we're in America, we're talking about Americans. They'll see things from other people's point of view just because they may go someplace where they're not the majority or they're outside of that mainstream culture. And even if you look like the people that you're going over to visit, they still have a completely different culture. They might have a completely different language. Even if they do speak English, it just broadens your world perspective. So that's always something that people get the more that they're able to be out there and connect with others online. And even, social media now does that. We're able to connect with different types of people all over the world. And it just connects you to them and whatever they're dealing with. Or it might not even be a bad thing. It could just be, what their life is, their daily life is. It's always interesting, at least in my opinion, to see people's different houses, like the inside of their homes, what the structures are made from. I always look at the floors, like the cabinetry, what they use, if they have curtains or doors, how do they wash their clothes? Like, do they use a clothing line? Do they have washer and dryer, or do they have like one of those combined washer and dryers? And so there's different ways of looking at that when it comes to privilege. But just know, like, when it comes to privilege in the U.S., it is not about finances for the most part that common people are talking about. Unless they're talking about Hollywood or wealthy people, it's talking about the systems or experiences someone might not have to live through or even know about or deal with because they have never had to, because they are part of a dominant mainstream group. And acclaim is given to people when people approve of them or praise them. So you could think of usually celebrities or stars, even those that aren't like super wealthy anymore, people still recognize them. And that does give them the notoriety to get back out there and go on certain shows like Dancing with the Stars. And that's like to kind of kick off, like they're coming back into the mainstream. For whatever reason they might have left. It could be, having children, or they moved, or, had a bad experience, whatever it might be. There's some steps to them getting back out there. And of course, press towards all of that, but people give them acclaim. Or even people that are wealthy. And so people tend to ascribe like positivity to those that are wealthy. Like when people become millionaires or billionaires, it's exciting. Even though people like pay to be on like the Forbes list. And of course, everybody doesn't do that, so you're not going to see their names in there. But once that's out and then it becomes more part of the press, then people say, oh, they're smart, or they're kind, or they're this and they're that. And that might not always be the truth, or it might be the truth. It just, it just depends. But how things are in the U.S., we do view people that we say that has accomplished something, or, the rags to riches story, or even if they were already rich, if they became more rich or more visually seen in different areas or different sections of society, then we start to give them acclaim. So positivity toward them. So when it comes to any of this stuff, it is very important that we know that people who do have privilege or power, that they do have greater control over their own destiny than maybe others may have. So in the book, it talks about the inequality when it comes to the entirety of America. We're going to talk about economic inequality later on in the book. But one of the statements or quotes in the book is that it says, the United States is one of the most industrialized nations. However, it has the largest gap in inequality. So it's just saying that we have the wealthiest people and the poorest people living within this country, even though we do have enough resources to cover everyone. You may have heard otherwise, but, there is enough in the U.S. as it is right now, with all the deficits that they have. No matter who is in office, there's always a deficit that they talk about. But there is enough food and healthcare for everyone right now. However, if you do that, then you can't have workers and people who become billionaires or those who want to become trillionaires. Now, there are families that are in that, but usually we just look at the one individual person or their spouse when it comes to people being billionaires, at least in the US. Okay, so make sure you're thinking critically about any issues or ethical issues that might come up. Um, it's important to know that some things just aren't true, especially when it comes to social media or, statements that people might make. Even now, when it comes to some of the news publications, since things are so quick, people are just putting out information, and sometimes they have to retract statements that they made that ended up being incorrect, or they'll say they have new information now. And it's because everyone's trying to one up the other station or beat each other, because that way they get more traffic, which translates to more money. So that's what a lot of that is about. But it's important to have non-biased news. So it's like for like PBS, like all kids could watch that growing up. Doesn't matter your income, doesn't matter your religion, your race, any of that. Watching things like Sesame Street, Barney, The Magic School Bus, things that really do teach kids. So just making sure that you're critically thinking about these things. Like, how will this affect society? How will this affect this section of society and that section? And is this something that we should have, or is it something that, is a waste? But just make sure you're doing your own research, especially when it comes to the statements people make on social media. Because a lot of the times it's incorrect. And a simple fact checking would allow you the benefit of understanding that. So not just using the fact check that's on a particular website or social media platform, but also looking up the information yourself. And what's also fascinating, a good idea to do, is to look up the information outside of the US if you're able to do that. If you use a different browser than the ones that are in the US, you might get more information or less biased information, because it's not going to be left-leaning or right-leaning. It's going to be how other countries are viewing a particular issue in the US. And that's very, eye-opening. And I forgot to talk about empowerment. So obviously, if you look at all these issues that people are dealing with, and the negativities that those have on people in society and their interactions, you have to look at the resiliency, strengths, empowerment. So focusing on the good things that people already have about them. Are these people already educated? Even if they are poor, if they're educated, then maybe you can give them resources. And if they have that educational wherewithal, maybe they're able to take that information and run with it and improve their situation. So there's different ways of looking at this, and focusing on someone's strengths to empower them is great, because they won't always need a social worker or someone to help them rise. They'll be able to do it themselves. So it's focusing on the ability to get people to sustain themselves in different situations. So maybe it's, if someone loses their job for, whatever reason, maybe they need to learn a new trade. And that way they could make more money for their family. Or even thinking about like the coal industry and how a lot of that has gone away. Well, having programs that would train people in certain areas, like you think of Appalachia, then the people would not have to like succumb to poverty unless they move. If they could take certain skills and have that brought to places like Appalachia, replacing that with coal, like if they want to replace different types of energy systems, or if they want to make like bullet trains or something like that, they can train those people who are part of other jobs from before, and then they'll be able to start these new professions without having to be in a lot of debt. So hopefully education one day will be available for everybody, without them having to go into debt, so they can better their circumstances. But focusing on what they already have the ability to do, or giving them new knowledge and attributes, will be great. So make sure you nurture their strengths and help develop whatever they might need. It could be somebody taking the GED exam. It could be someone learning how to apply for a job or write a resume. I'm only, mostly talking about finances, but these are things that you can do to help somebody. enhance their power, enhance their communication. So if there's somebody who already speaks 2 languages, but maybe they don't feel secure in that, maybe they could work on practicing more verbal techniques, and that way they can apply for a job in a month or, a few weeks. If they just keep talking to people, that's the best way to get to improve any interpretation of language and speaking language. You've already heard, you'll lose it if you don't use it. So just keep that in mind. Also, for strength, focus on resources, capabilities, knowledge, abilities, motivations, experience, intelligence, and other positive qualities. So when it comes to students that I have that might feel like, oh my gosh, class is too hard, or my life is lifing right now and it's just too much. Well, I try to get them to think about, well, why did you sign up for school in the first place? Was it to make your family proud? Was it to prove something to yourself? Was it to get into a career that you wanted for yourself? Was it to prove people wrong? So just think about that. Like, what was the initial reason why you signed up? And then knowing that life is going to keep lifing no matter what, maybe sticking through it and going great, taking into account your circumstances and just not giving up, that'll help. So just look at multiple sources that can be dealt with when it comes to strength. Make sure you look at the person's, if they want to deal with ethics, social justice, values, think about the values that they already have and how they could increase that. Maybe connect them to people that have similar values and similar ethics so they can take action on whatever those values might be. The book, it shows a bunch of workers coming together, and you've heard about this for the past few years and this year, that workers are on strike in different types of roles and jobs, and they're just trying to get more money. You might have heard of like the port workers striking before, other workers with certain companies that deliver goods have gone on strike, and that is to improve their situation in life, especially with AI and more automation. There are jobs that it's still great to have people in, and making sure people have a livable wage. So that's important, and just connecting them with others that can empower them even more. Just know that Congress consistently votes to not increase the minimum wage federally, even though it's obvious that things have gone up over time. And so hopefully that's something that will be changed one day, that they'll increase the minimum wage, because if they increase the minimum wage, it'll increase other people's jobs, the amount of money they're getting paid, especially those that are working by the hour. So just keep that in mind. There's no real thing as trickle-down economics. If this person at this huge company gets wealthy, it doesn't mean that they're going to give money or benefits to their employees. They could if they want, but a lot of times they don't, because then they won't become a billionaire, because they'll be giving away more money. So there's empowerment through groups, there's empowerment through community and organizing and using the resources that are already available without them having to apply for grants. People that have already dealt with adversity might be a support to others who are dealing with a new type of diversity. So keep that in mind. They might have resiliency, and that means that they're able to function even though there is hardship. So during a recession, somebody might speak to an older family member who went through the Great Depression, just to see what little nuggets of information do they have to share, or what did they feel like they learned from living through the Great Depression, since we're currently in a recession. So those are some things that people will do, or even making a plan with their family and friends of what to do if they feel like they might not have enough to get through the month. They might have friends or family they can go to help cover that, the expenses with childcare or whatever it might be. And when it comes to values, those are perceptions and opinions held by individuals, professions, and cultures about what is good and what is desirable. And so when it comes to ethics, so based on the values that we think about that are good and desirable, that determines the behavior. And that determines how people go about things when it comes to strikes, or when it comes to social justice of any kind. So social workers do have their own code of ethics. If you want more information, you can find out about that on page 19. It has 1 through 6. So the first one is the primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems. 2, social workers challenge social injustice. 3, social workers respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person. 4, social workers recognize the centered importance of human relationships. 5, social workers behave in a trustworthy manner. And 6, social workers practice within their areas of competence and develop and enhance their own professional expertise. When it comes to a framework or a theory, we are looking at ideas on how to understand the world or how to view the world. And it helps you direct attention to what may need to change or what may need to be focused on. And it helps us understand why people behave a certain way who are in those situations. When it comes to ecosystems theory, just make sure you understand that there is a person in environment that is dealing with a situation or situations. And we're trying to understand what they do, how they do it, why they do it. And we're also understanding their living systems and those transactions. So the transactions could be the people that they're dealing with. It could be the job that they have to go to, or if they have a car, or if they don't. But it just basically helps us understand what's going on with people and then how we can make changes for those people. These are some terms or vocabulary words that are important in this chapter. So a system, which you've heard me refer to a lot, is a set of elements that are orderly and interrelated to make a functional whole. So basically, it's a way of things working. So you might have a system or a process at work. And within that process, you have different people working in that system. So you might have to speak with your manager. You might have to speak with the director at the beginning of each day. You might have to send out emails. So just understanding other systems and also realizing that if you might be a single person or somebody that leaves home and their family is still at home, so you have your own familial system at home of how you deal with things and how you interpret things. Like, how do you start your day? Like, when you wake up, are the kids, doing what they should do, or are they being silly and, not getting dressed, not doing what they have to do? So you might be a little bit more stressed that morning or might run late. So just looking at all of that, those are all our systems. Boundaries are borders or margins that separate us from one another. So you could think of it as a certain neighborhood could be a boundary, or a certain school could be a boundary. A certain religion could be a boundary. Even our body itself is a whole system, various systems working together. And a subsystem is like a subordinate system. So it's a system that's like a bullet point or under the other system. So if you think of nurse managers, basically, and then they have nurses that are under them, and then you have, you might have RNs under them, and then you might have CNAs under those people working. So that those subsets, or like the bullet points, would be a subsystem. Homeostasis is like when things are stable, things are calm, things are neutral. So are things running smoothly in your life? Even is your car running smoothly? Or is it the type of car that just might stop working on the highway and that causes you to not make it to work on time? So just thinking everything is a system, and wanting things to be even keel, copacetic, that would be homeostasis. And then a role. A role is what we as in society has deemed normal, or what people should be doing. So you might hear, when it comes to dating a lot, you hear people talk about gender roles, like what do they view when it comes to this and that, or when it comes to parenting, the roles that they might want to take, or even when it comes to friends. Is it the type of friend that always has the ideas, or the type of friend that plans things, or the one that's more go with the flow? So all of these interactions, just remember that they are all systems. So relationships are reciprocal and dynamic. So basically, reciprocal is like what you do for me, I do for you. So you can call me if you have an issue, and I could call you if I have an issue, whether it's between us or outside of us. So it's just making sure that you're getting your cup filled too, and your friends also getting their cup filled. Input involves energy of information and communication from various systems. So maybe if you're running late that day and your car isn't working, maybe it could be because, like I mentioned before, Congress might have decided that no, they don't want to increase the federal minimum wage. So maybe that's affecting the state you live in, and that also affects your ability to get a better car that will work better for you, so you're not late. So just taking the energy and looking for things, like you'd have to look online, like, okay, this year is my salary going to change, or my hourly pay going to change, looking into maybe getting another job, so looking to systems of applying for other jobs, or looking at if you want to work in a hospital, or would you rather work in a doctor's office, or if you're lucky enough to know somebody that has their own practice or office, that maybe you could work there without all the extra stress, and maybe they'll be more understanding of your car not working versus a larger institution that they might just see you as late. They might not know exactly what's going on with your car. And then output is your response to that system. So maybe you're more stressed, so you might snap at your spouse or snap at a friend, or be even, forgetful when it comes to your job, just because of how stressed you are, dealing with the kids not being right in the morning, not acting right, and then the car not working correctly. So all of those things are going on in someone's mind as a person. So all of those are systems. I mentioned output already as how someone might react to certain systems or situations that are going on. And outcomes are actually different than output. Outcomes are specified variables that are measured to evaluate. So the outcome might actually be if you get your work done for the day or not. That might be something that's actually measurable. So you can see every time your car isn't working, that you don't get all your work done, and either you have to stay late or maybe take it home, which of course will add to the person's stress and the feedback going through the systems. So when it comes to feedback, it's dealing with different input that is received when it comes to performance. So is the car working correctly, or is the student able to make it to their clinicals, or they can't because their car isn't working certain days, or it's unstable, or maybe they have to ask friends for rides. So the person would have to evaluate what's going on within themselves, or maybe an outer entity, which hopefully isn't the boss, would evaluate what's going on with that person. So there could be negative feedback, and that's dealing with the negative functioning, such as cars not working, kids being maybe a little bit more defiant that morning. And there could be positive feedback with giving the person information on what can make things easier for them. Like some jobs give people like free bus passes in case something happens with their cars. So that way they can just take the bus, and that could be the backup for them. Or telling them, like, yeah, you're stressed, but you're still doing a great job getting everything done, or you're still being a great parent. That helps with resiliency and reinforcing what people need in order to keep going. Dealing with interface, it's where two systems come into contact. So one system could be the family, and then another system could be the car not working. So how does the family deal with the car not working? Does it interfere with the kids getting picked up, or do the kids take the bus, or do they live close enough where they could walk a couple of blocks to the school safely? So it just depends, but we're looking at what affects another thing. Differentiation, it's just thinking about how can I make things more complex? How can I make things better? How can I improve what I'm dealing with? So if the kids are, maybe being difficult that morning, it should be as simple as making sure they don't have a ton of sugar before bed or a few hours before bed. So that way they'll be ready to actually go to sleep. Maybe having a routine for them, bathe them, depending on like their age, maybe all read a book together, That's what I do with my kids. So it readily came to mind. Just to make sure when we start winding down, I start turning off more lights in the house. Let's, put down the toys that are loud, specifically for my son. And then if they have their tablets for a little bit, I make sure I turn on the blue shade, and so that way the lighting doesn't get to their eyes, which of course the blue light keeps you awake. So having the ability to turn that off, so that way if a child is watching a show or listening to a book on the tablet, it won't interfere with their body's ability to go to sleep. Entropy is the tendency of a system to progress toward disorganization. So that's basically everything is falling apart. The person is stressed. Maybe they raised their voice at the kids that morning, so that made one of the kids cry more or be more upset, which made everybody run more late because, of course, you got to get the hugs and the talking it out, and then running late with the car. That the car is it's just not working, and then one thing in a car messes up, and then more and more and more of it stops working. So that would be entropy. Things go from disorganization, depletion, where maybe the person just feels like they have no more to give, and then death. So it might not mean the death of the person. It can mean like the death of the system. Like maybe the car just stops working, or maybe it's the end of a relationship because of how they're taking out, their stress on other people, or maybe it's the end of, their job because they're not able to meet the requirements because they're so upset. So negative entropy, it sounds like it's bad, but it's actually positive. It's the opposite of everything falling apart. It's when people are growing and developing. So they're finding ways of coping and they're still able to make things work and get things done. And equifinality is the fact that there are many means to the same end. So, hey, if your car is not working, maybe you can use your spouse's car or a loved one's car. Maybe they work from home, so they don't need it. But finding other ways just to make things work. Like you still got to get it done. Like that famous celeb says, at the end of the day's going to end. One of the very important concepts I actually want you to get out of this class would be dealing with the various systems, and that would be the micro, meso, and macro systems. Sometimes meso is going to be spelled with an S. It just depends on who's writing about it, but it's the same thing. So these three systems and how they overlap and how a person interacts with these three systems every day, and how sociologists and social workers take this into account. So on page 35 of your textbook, it talks about that. And then I also added a simplified diagram to your discussion. I added two, so hopefully it makes sense to you, but let's just get into it. Okay, so the microsystem, which is looking at the lower level or like the individual level of a person, it deals with biological, psychological, and social systems. So when it comes to social work, they focus on what this person needs, like what problem is this person dealing with, and what strengths do they already have to deal with this issue, and then what might they do about the issue? How would they go about solutions? How can I help them go about solutions? And how can I help them make the best choices for their certain situation? So say somebody who is low on funds, somebody who's poor, and they want to try to eat healthier because maybe they are pre-diabetic. So knowing this about the person and taking into account their body and what they know, maybe taking them to a nutrition class or going shopping with them to ensure that they understand what type of foods they should eat, but also making sure that it fits their budget and their needs. And hopefully it does. And if it doesn't fully cover it, getting them hooked up with services like from churches or from community centers that might give away food. Sometimes hospitals give away food for like holidays. I've seen doctors' offices do it. Some grocery stores do it. Or there might be, people in the neighborhood or family members or friends who will do more of a potluck style just to make sure that everyone has enough to eat during trying times, such as a recession, that we're currently in. Then moving on to the mesosystem. So it's any group. So that could be family, it could be coworkers, or a religious group. It could be an activist group, it just basically anything that puts people together, any type of group, and learning what their goals are for that group, what is the common goal, what do they want to accomplish, and what do they need to accomplish those things. So we talked about like the labor movement and how the port workers and other workers may be going on strike last year, this year, um, because they believe that they should have more. Um, so what do they need? Do they need to get attention of the media? Do they need to get attention of unions? Do they need to join a union, or is a union already involved? Do they want to get the public involved? Also, when it comes to teachers, for years, in different areas, they've gone on strike, or they'll tell people what bill not to vote on, whatever is going to harm the children when it comes to education. And they might stand on the side of the road, but knowing it's the teachers, most people will, side with what the teachers want, because they know that these are people who give so much of themselves to help these children grow. And, of course, our society is the worst of us, basically, or the least of us. And, going on to the macro system, we're going to look at how things affect people from a larger perspective. So that would be laws, politics, social norms, policies, maybe at that company, if it's a large company, and how that affects the individual and how it can also affect groups. So remember, these systems are intertwined. One system does not work without the other. So these three groups are constantly going. If you look at the on page 35, it has a diagram and it just shows all the interlocking groups. I want you to remember that these groups are always working. These systems are always working together, and people, groups, society basically has to navigate these at multiple times. So everyone is part of this. So when people say it's a system of this or a system of that, that is the problem, that's sort of what they're referring to. Like you might hear people say a system of oppression. So usually they're not talking about particular people. When it comes to that, they're talking about how things are, how certain laws are, how society views things. Just maybe how a certain group of people might be dehumanized because, the media will put rhetoric or ideas out there that when you think of this group, you think of this negative thing. They'll do it over and over and over until, it gets submerged in our brains, and then that gives the ability for people to cause more harm to whomever is part of that group. So right now I'm considering thinking about disability when it comes to this. So some people will say, well, they don't feel like they should have to pay for people's healthcare who are disabled or elderly. And thinking about as an individual, it might not affect them. It might affect, their parents or their grandparents or, their neighbor, but they might not think it directly affects them. However, as we see, all these systems are interlocking. So eventually, somebody's going to have to pay for that. So usually if people aren't taken care of that are disabled or elderly or tend to get sick, they end up going to hospitals. So there's hospitals that are going to take them no matter what. Certain types of hospitals. And when that happens, then there is a bill. The person obviously can't pay the bill. So either it's going to result in an increase of prices on things that they bill other people for to make up for that loss, or the hospital might close, just depending on what's going on with that hospital and if they have enough funds. So that's why when people say that, in my mind, it just tells me that they don't understand that there's multiple systems working together. Things don't work individually. The U.S. is a very individualistic country. We're taught to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, or if you work hard you're going to reap the benefits. However, it is also great to have community and family and to look out for one another, to make sure people are okay, to make sure people have enough to eat, that there aren't kids starving, that there aren't veterans on the streets, that people are getting proper treatment for their mental health care, because we know that could lead to homelessness and poverty and just being alone because people can't deal with it. And that also makes things harder later on for nurses because they're going to have to deal with these patients. And hearing stories, sometimes patients can be combative. So just knowing that all of this is intertwined. If certain people don't have access to insurance, then their kids might not get the vaccinations or what they might need, but they still have to go to school. So then that might make another kid get sick who has a weaker immune system, and then that kid brings it home. So sort of how, you know, certain illnesses can be spread easily, like measles is coming back. We had gotten rid of that, and now you see that there's cases sprouting up, all over, not all over the U.S., but in different parts of the U.S., so vastly increasing, and that is because there's a weak link in those systems. These systems do not work separately. All things work together. So just keep that in mind when it comes to any of these social issues, because it's going to affect more people than what people realize. Because people interact with other people, they interact with environments, they interact with families. That's just how it is. And so these types of theories help people understand that. And then it helps people think about what can they do to make things change for the better, for everyone. So thinking about it, it's anything where people live, work, and play. I'm in public health, and that's usually what we say. So any environment where people live, work, and play. And play, it could be like playgrounds, or it could be extracurricular activities. It could be community centers. It could be where people spend time when they go to church or temples or wherever they might go, or if they go outside and they're with nature. Like, there's something that's affecting everything. It's all connected. And so you have to think about, okay, so what are the solutions? How can we think about solutions? Well, we can look at communities. What can a community do in a certain situation to improve this? Or we can look at individuals, maybe giving people, disseminating or giving out information to people in a way that they can understand, so they can become educated on whatever it is. Maybe it's healthcare. And then realizing, like, if there's programs that have been cut, like for some people, elderly people who are retired or maybe disabled, the Meals on Wheels has been cut where they live. So maybe they might need people to drive out to wherever they are and take them to get to the store. Just maybe someone in the community or a family member or someone could do that to help fill in certain gaps. And also think about how organizations are structured. So is this something where people need to call their Congress members? Or is it something where they need to call certain health insurance companies and put in a bunch of complaints? Or is it something that certain companies could say, hey, we're a large company and we don't want to work with this particular health insurance company because they aren't going to be there for people as a whole? There are power moves that people could make to make differences for everybody. But just realize that all these things work together. And they have different roles for people to work together. So talking about enabler. So an enabler, when it comes to social work, is a person that can help people experience needs, help people interpret needs, help people find the needs, understand, analyze, all of that. So somebody who is already able to do that, to see, okay, I'm living in this community, what do we need? We don't have access to clean water. Okay, that's something the government is supposed to take care of. So they'll either contact the Congress members. First they'll probably start locally, and then also letting other people realize, like, no, like, hey, our drinking water is not good. Well, what's going on here? Like, why is it not acceptable for us to drink or bathe with this? Is it going to cause other issues? Go to the doctor and see if people are facing health issues with this. How is it affecting kids? And then a broker. A broker is a person who links individuals and groups maybe to resources that they didn't know were available, or someone who can explain things or translate. An advocate is somebody who can basically improve that person or those people's situation. So they can advocate for them. Maybe there's somebody who has a background in research or a background in law, and so they're able to bridge the divide between organizations and people. Another thing is empowering. So we already talked about empowerment earlier, but that's finding the positives in either people, groups, organizations that they already have. What are their strengths already, and how can those strengths be improved upon? Then there's the activist. The activist is the person who is there to make change. They're there to make the noise. They're going to be the loud ones. They're going to be outside. They're going to be giving out information. They're going to be educating people. They might deal with conflict and confrontation and negotiation to make sure people get their needs met. A mediator is somebody who might deal with two parties and just to make sure people understand each other, but they are like their own entity, so they might not be a stakeholder on either side, but they want the two sides to come to an agreement. A negotiator is somebody who is on the side of whomever, and they're trying to negotiate and get their terms met. An educator is somebody who teaches about a certain topic that people are trying to make change with. An initiator is somebody who brings attention to a situation, whether that's doing a social media post, calling the news. A coordinator brings information together, organizations together, and meets people where they are and brings them into different environments. So that could be financial, emotional, legal, health, social, educational, recreational, and interactional. So it could be like a case manager or a social worker. Then there's the researcher, person who's always studying and figuring out the community needs while also interacting with the community. A group facilitator is somebody who will become a leader for that group and help lead them maybe in therapy or lead them in dealing with the worker strikes. A public speaker is somebody who's going to talk to a variety of groups. They can talk to people who live in a certain neighborhood. They can talk to community members. They can talk to the news outlets, or they can take to social media to spread the information that people will follow and people are more likely to listen to. Maybe it's like their ability to talk, their ability to be understood. Maybe it's their personality that gets people to pay attention, someone who's dynamic. So all those things are important, especially when it comes to public speaking. That in itself is a skill. It's not something that everybody has, but what's important is that utilizing all these interlocking pieces, people are able to get their goals across.